Good afternoon. It is June 26th, and we have our Des Moines Water Works report fully. All 5 board members are here. This is great, and our legal counsel. So we will begin with the consent agenda. Do we have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved. Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Moving right along, we have our first item. Bill, would you like to review item 3A?
Happy to jump right in. This has been presented to the Finance Committee through our auditors, RSM, who represent our independent auditing. At your request, you have before you essentially 3 kind of groups of
Before we do that, we perhaps should mention that there's no one here to offer public comments for viewers at home.
Thank you.
Sorry to interrupt.
Thank you. No, just as a reminder, we always offer public comment if we have anyone interested in speaking either on an agenda item or any other item before the board. Thank you.
You have before you 3 really kind of groups of audit reports, one on financial reporting, a second essentially on the audit report itself involving internal controls, and then a block of 3 different audit reports involving our services to the city of Des Moines for collection services involving sewer, storm, water, and solid waste. At the end of the day, all of these are unqualified or so-called clean opinion. And again, we're between Peggy and myself, particularly relying on Peggy. I'm confident we can try and address any question you may have, but otherwise we would ask for your motion to receive and file these.
So I'm looking for a motion to receive and file the 2017 financial audit reports and distribute copies to the appropriate agencies. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second. Okay. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Bill, can I just point out that there were actual bound copies at each board member's place, and they are the exact same reports that are in the board packet, but just so that you have an easy, handy one, because I'm sure you want to pick them up every night and read them before bed, and that way you don't have to dig out your board packet to do so.
Peggy, can we make, I did not grab one intentionally, but can we make sure that we get a set to AFSCME, please, just for their benefit? Thank you.
Okay. Moving along, we have item 3B, to receive and file a 5-year capital improvement plan. Bill?
Another item that was before Finance and Audit now several months ago, and I apologize for the gap between it being in front of Finance and Audit and being received and filed by the board generally. Again, when I had interviewed with many of the members here that are on the board, there was a significant emphasis from you in questioning and interviewing me about coming up with more than a 1-year CIP. The first couple of years that I was here, 3 or 4 years that I was here, as I recall, we focused on a 3-year CIP. This, in fact, is a 5-year capital improvement program budget. A lot of numbers, and certainly as we are in out years, subject to significant change based upon business needs and our revenues, and certainly some of the discussions that are ongoing now. The one page that I think might be interesting for you to look at would be the last page in the report itself, the CIP, that indicates items that have been added and items that have been removed. And you'll see a significant emphasis on the Saylorville Water Treatment Plant for added items within the next 5 years, as well as a well field over by North High that we've talked about. before as a source of water through the Des Moines River pumping station here to the Fluor Drive plant, and then dropping of a number of projects you'll also see on that same page. So as a matter of interest, I think you might find it interesting to at least look at the numbers that are involved here. We have significant detail available, obviously, for each and every one of these. But again, a nice kind of summary of what's been added in the 5-year period and what will fall out. We're about ready to enter into our regular operating and maintenance and CIP budget process for 2019. Obviously, you'll be hearing more about those details later on towards the end of this year. Happy to answer any questions you might have here. Otherwise, we'd ask you to receive and file.
So I'm looking for a motion to receive and file the 5-year capital improvement plan.
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Moving along to item 3C.
This is one where we actually ask for your action. You know that we have about $1 million plus or minus in insurance unrelated to employee health insurance. This is essentially casualty and loss associated with our property and liabilities from that property. We use a brokerage service for corporate insurance. And frankly, over the years that Peggy's been here as an example, all 3 of the respondents to our request for proposals have served us currently, that is through October 31st. AJ Gallagher will continue to be our broker for insurance services. Peggy and her staff, Donna Heckman, does a great deal of the corporate insurance work for us. Really decided that it might be appropriate to do an RFP because we haven't bid this book of business for some period of time. These are the results from that RFP, the request for proposals. You'll see we had 3 respondents. The staff recommendation is to move forward for a multi-year period with LMC, who's done this work for us in the past. Again, Gallagher has done it very satisfactorily for us. But there's a fairly significant difference in fees over the projected 5-year period of time looking forward. And the LMC proposal also had an incentive for additional savings in which they would receive a portion of those savings. Happy to answer any questions you may have, but this is one in which we're asking for your action to move to LMC as our corporate insurance broker.
There may be some discussion on this one because we spent a significant amount of time, I think, in finance and audit. But first, I'll be looking for a motion to approve the selection of LMC Insurance and Risk Management as insurance broker for property and casualty insurance.
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
Okay, any discussion?
I'll just say, Sue, we did discuss this quite a bit at the Finance and Audit Committee meeting. As Bill pointed out, what LMC is proposing is interesting and probably will, I have every hope that it's going to work real well, that they will go out and, market and look for savings for us, and should they find those savings, their incentive is that they keep a portion of those. Sue and I think Dave was at the meeting as well, discussed kind of the concept of how a broker works, and that in some ways one might think that a broker should always aggressively go out and find those savings, and that this is, why are we going to reward, if you will, LMC for this. We had a discussion about the fact that our book of business is smaller relative to what some of their other clients are, and that this extra incentive, if you will, from LMC seems to make sense. But we also wanted, or at least I did, I said I wanted to be clear that, in this case where LMC looks like the lowest amount of bidder, granted, if they were to save a lot of money, they may actually no longer be the lowest bidder. And so that's a fair thing to say. After discussing it with Peggy and Bill and everyone else in the room, I feel comfortable that this is that this makes sense to do that. But the only reason I bring it up now, for those who weren't present at the Finance and Audit Committee meeting, is because it is different, and it's worth at least noting that what's being proposed here is outside of the norm and may I hope that we report back in a year or so that it was well worth our while.
It was a robust discussion and conversation, and it is a new approach, someone said that. Any other discussion or questions for the committee or Bill or Peggy? Okay, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, item 3D.
3D and E, 3D, E, and F are similar. These are closeout items from water main replacement projects last year with 3 different contractors. The first one involves Polk County and our request of closing out our agreement with J&K Contracting. You'll note that this involves the payment of about $1.2 million for Polk County projects. We have a good map of these kind of potpourri of projects for each of these items, should you care to look at them. But these are pretty pro forma for us. Dan and his staff do a great job of working with the contractors, inspecting the work, making progress payments, and finally closing out the contracts. This is that last step for final payment to J&K Contracting of about $1.2 million.
So we're looking for a motion to accept the 2017 Des Moines Water System Improvements Contract 1 completed by J&K Contracting LLC in the amount of $1,197,078.94.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Item 3E, very similar, same contractor actually, in a very similar amount, $1.2 million, but instead of being projects, water main replacement projects in Polk County, they're in fact in the city of Des Moines, which means they have different funding sources, you know, and are differently rated for customers in the area. These falling, of course, to Des Moines residents or Des Moines ratepayers. Again, same basic process. We have inspected, made progress payments, and believe the work has been substantially and satisfactorily completed. We're asking your permission after acceptance to pay $1.2 million plus or minus to J&K Contracting for work done here within the city of Des Moines.
Okay. And I apologize to everyone, but I want to make sure I'm on the right numbers here, as I have 21 documents open. So I'm looking for a motion to accept the 2017 Des Moines Water System Improvements Contract 1 completed by J&K Contracting LLC in the amount of $1,197,078.94. We had a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And opposed?
Did you have a motion?
Yes, we had a motion, and you had the
What's
second.
the agenda number?
I think that was the wrong amount.
Yeah, I do too. Is
3E.
it 3E? No, it's the wrong amount.
$1,203,680.44.
Let's have a do-over.
Let's do
So
it.
moved.
Thank you. So the motion is to accept the 2017 Des Moines Water System Improvements Contract 1 by J&K Contracting in the amount of $1,203,680.44. And my thanks to the board for keeping me straight on 1E.
So I'll move that.
Thank you. Second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And for those watching at home, we'll see we are being green. We are working from our computers and our tablets. We did not print out a ton of paper, so we are saving money and trees. Moving right along, we have item 3F.
Item 3F, same song, different verse. This is a payment to Des Moines Water Systems, for Des Moines Water Systems improvements from 2017 to Rognus Corporation. Again, staff has inspected and made progress payments, and we are now ready to accept the street work indicated on the attachment to the map attachment to your yellow sheet, and requesting payment to Rognus of $1,016,611.40.
We're looking for a motion to accept the 2017 Des Moines Water System Improvements Contract 2 completed by Rogers Corporation in the amount of $1,016,611.40. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Moving into a public hearing.
This is a project that you're very familiar with. This is moving water essentially from the Maffitt Treatment Facility beneath the interstate and to the east to the cities of Cumming and Norwalk, and also providing service for a portion of the West Des Moines Waterworks service territory involving a new Microsoft facility. This is phase 3 and 4 of that project. The bidding tab in front of you indicates, it looks like 6 different bidders. The staff recommendation and what looks to be some very good and aggressive pricing here is to Vanderpool Construction for about $1.87 million with base bid and alternate bidding combined. You'll recall this is money that's paid directly, that's paid by Des Moines Waterworks, but funded entirely by both Cumming and Norwalk.
So we will open the public hearing, see if there are any comments from the public regarding the form of contract, plans, specifications, and estimated cost. I see none. I close the public hearing. I see that that there is a finding that there is no facility of this kind to be constructed available for rent or sharing from another agency. Is that correct, Bill?
That's correct. There's a 28E18 finding by Dan Cloffer in your materials.
Will that be our last finding from Dan?
And knowing Dan, he'll find other reasons to communicate with us, I'm confident. That maybe the last communication you see in this form, at least, Sue.
Okay. We'll miss those, Dan. Moving right along, I'd like a motion to approve the form of contract, plans, specifications, and estimated cost.
So moved.
In a second.
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And now we will have an analysis of the bids. Bill?
Again, 6 respondents here. You'll see the range is pretty narrow. The actual engineering estimate prepared by our staff was about $1.9 million. This is substantially beneath that, and that's always a pleasant, if not surprise, for us. So we have done previous work, or Vanderpool has done previous work with us, and they're certainly satisfactory along those lines. We are asking your permission to award to Vanderpool Construction base bid plus the alternate bid A.
So I'm looking for a motion to award the Northwest Warren County Feeder Main contract for base bid and alternate bid A to Vanderpool Construction, Inc. in the amount of $1,588,915, and to authorize the chairperson, CEO, and general manager to execute the contract.
So moved.
In a second.
Second.
Any other discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And opposed? Okay. Moving ahead to 3H.
Pretty rare, in my experience here, at least in my 5 or 6 year experience with you, but I've certainly seen it in other contexts many times. This is a conveyance, a requested conveyance to Drake University of a main owned by Des Moines Waterworks on now property that's wholly surrounded by Drake University property. We have no real interest in this water main any further. You may ask why Drake would want it. The reality is that it releases them from restrictions on what can happen on the ground above the pipe. So they're obviously very interested in moving forward with improvements that might be inconsistent with restrictions that we otherwise would have. So this is a conveyance for adequate consideration, $1, of our main to Drake University at their request. Again, relatively unusual, but something that happens with the conveyance and abandonment of streets like those that are described in the materials at issue here on 27th and Carpenter, as I recall.
I am going to be abstaining from this.
Okay, thank you. So I'm looking for a motion from the board to approve the conveyance of the water main to Drake University, conveying approximately 855 feet of 8-inch water main now in place in the vacated 27th Street, which is approximately 671 feet of 8-inch water main now in the vacated Carpenter Avenue, and authorize chairperson, CEO, and general manager to execute the conveyance of this water main.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Okay. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed and abstaining.
Aye.
One abstention from trustee Mark Wallace.
Moving ahead, we have,
Board committee reports.
yes, planning committee.
Okay, I think we had a report on aging mains and replacement. All right, Bill, do you wanna?
Dave, you
He always-
summarized it perfectly. I'm sorry, as I
Always like that.
scramble here to find the materials that were provided to you. We had a presentation from Katie Vandal, one of our staff engineers working for Dan on the modeling that we use to come up with our water main replacement budget and priorities. And you have, as a board, heard before about our intention to meet an AWWA benchmark about failures per distance. This process of modeling to find out where we can maximize our dollars and coordinating with the City of Des Moines CIP projects are vitally important to making sure we're spending dollars in the right way. Some discussion at the planning committee about the actual model and how that process is followed.
Thank you. Finance and audit committee, Brad?
Finance and Audit Committee, of course, we've discussed a couple of the more important things that we did with the broker services and audit reports. I don't think I need to go through that. We also discussed ongoing discussion with the City of Des Moines on right-of-way management fees, and look forward to that ongoing discussion. We then heard, well, we talked a lot at length about the Des Moines Waterworks Park Foundation, and more specifically, events in the park. This came out of a discussion that was in the customer, actually started the development meeting before the customer relations meeting about the RFP that the foundation is working on for event management promoter type of relationship. And so we had quite a lengthy discussion. Sam Carroll from the Park Foundation was here as well. And at the conclusion of that discussion, I offered to take a whack at a first draft, if you will, of a policy, which I've done. I shared copies, and they were all quick to respond with Bill, Rick, and Ted today, and have gotten some response from them. I'm going to pass out to you kind of a draft of a policy, and before I do that, I'll explain. Bill had a suggestion that we consider, I think maybe it's Sue had a suggestion at the committee meeting, is this policy or is this a procedure? Bill said, use the word guideline. Thanks to Rick's counsel, I'm reminded that we have a policy about special events that exists in our manual today, so it probably would make sense if we're going to do anything to amend the policy so that this policy is not superseded. This guideline procedure would not be superseded by the policy. So I still recommend that we consider a policy change. And what I did here was try to lay out, if you will, kind of what we're looking for in the park, the types of things, and so that's where you see kind of a preamble there. And you can see this would be in section 703 to be exact, or special events. What's in black there would be the existing language. The red would replace the existing language. And we don't need to discuss this today. Obviously, there's a lot to digest. What I'd like you to do is take it, think about it, and then at the appropriate time to have this on the agenda so that we can approve it. But it does a couple of things. And one is it sets out kind of the vision for the park, if you will, what the Des Moines Waterworks Board of Trustees sees as appropriate for the park, states clearly that the sole responsibility for approving and entering rental and lease agreements remains with Des Moines Waterworks. It speaks to the 28E with the foundation, specifically that the foundation will receive revenue from certain events within Waterworks Park. I didn't spell out what those certain events were because that's part of the 28E and I didn't want to restate it, and so I referred to the 28E. Item 3, again, is somewhat a restatement of what's in the 28E, but that the foundation will work together to coordinate events, but then states clearly that Des Moines Waterworks, at its sole discretion, has the right to deny approval of any event, concert, or other activity, and I will not use the example that I used in the last meeting. But it was Naked Rock 2019 or something.
You just use that example.
I know, I couldn't resist. So titillating. Item 4, and this one, again, this can come or go, but this also came out of something that Rick talked about at the committee meeting, and that is that we do have an agreement with the foundation. The foundation will receive revenue from ticketed events and others. Obviously, that revenue is used for them to meet their capital improvement and ongoing needs with us. This may be or may not be an appropriate place to acknowledge that we have that revenue sharing or that revenue agreement with them, but also speak to the fact that, you know, those non-revenue events, weddings, free concerts, small things, may not have to go through the foundation. And then finally, that the Des Moines, the general manager and CEO is assigned a responsibility for approving and entering agreements. And then the one thing I want you to really consider is the last part of 5, and that is there's language in there that says that the Board of Trustees would approve any event, and Ted and Bill provided guidance on this, of participants over 1,000 people. I had initially said 750, and I just grabbed it out of the air because I was trying to think of something larger than a wedding, so that didn't have to come to the board. They think 1,000 is a better number, and I agree with them. But that anything over 1,000 or something that is specifically disruptive, loud event, something would come before this board. Ted pointed out late, and I didn't put it in this draft, that, you know, we do have large participant events like walks or runs or those such of things. I could amend this so that those type of events may not have to come, unless the board wanted to, but those type of events might not have to be approved by this board because they don't cause a significant disruption to other things going on in the park or to the neighborhood. And so we could put in some language there so that those events, so the staff has the ability to approve those events without coming to us. So that being said, I mean, if we're artful and correct about the language, and so really what we're talking about is concerts here and those big events. What are we talking about? 6 a year probably?
Currently a couple.
Right. They're doing a couple now in 6, and I know Sue and I have discussed, you know, we want to make sure that this doesn't turn into Des Moines' premier concert venue, where there's a concert going on, you know, every week during the summer. And so having some sort of board oversight over those large events, especially as we go through this initial phase with the foundation, makes sense to me. And so that's the purpose of this. You know, feel free to comment or ask questions about this now, but again, my intent was to give you something to ruminate on and know that it will come back to the board at a future meeting.
Well, and I want to say from the discussion, Graham, thank you for offering to take this up, because we were saying, you know, it'd be very easy for this board to have one idea of what we have in mind for concerts, and then as the board evolves or as time evolves, you know, there's 6 concerts, then 8, then 12, then someone says, well, that's what we were trying to do, is to gear up for the 30 that we need to break even. So this is a great start. I do have one question.
Mhm.
We had tossed out a couple of numbers of how many major concerts there would be, and I noticed you didn't put that in here. Can you give us some rationale?
I couldn't decide, again, without pulling a number out of the air of what that number would be. And that's why I thought it was better that if the board had to approve events, over 1,000 people, or ones that consider, were likely to cause large disruption in the community, then the board would have to do that. Or actually, I think it comes from Ted's email to me today. I think it's feasible to expect that as the foundation works through this, what you'd have was a calendar of events that would come together. And so I think it's more likely that the board, well, maybe the board will approve each event individually, but I think at the time the board's approving, event number 1 for the summer, there's gonna be a kind of a clear indication of how many events, are on the, are potentially on the horizon. That doesn't really answer your question, other than I didn't know how to come up with a number, and I didn't really want to lock one in necessarily, to say we're only gonna have 4 events in the summer, where maybe you're gonna have 5 one summer, I don't know. But I think that's something you should think about, because that could be something that, added in. And right before you go back to that, one thing I wanted that I kind of glossed over, another purpose of this policy is so that not only don't future boards, begin to have 30 concerts in the park, also that there's that relationship between the foundation, so that we communicate very clearly with the foundation the process and how we interact, so that there is no surprise, that they think we're going to do one thing and then we turn around and do something else.
Right.
And so that kind of goes to your point too about numbers. So, but if you have some on, think about that and think about how we write, if we need to write something else, or if the approval of the big events in and of itself is enough.
I think it'll evolve over time,
I agree.
seeing what kind of events, how people manage themselves in it, who complains or doesn't complain. I mean, I think 1,000 is hard because, I was just heard an 80-35 ad for acts they're having. I never heard of a single one, and I thought, well, these won't attract any people. But I think, how do you know with social media, if it's gonna attract 1,000 people? People just.
Well, I think one of those questions is, should the foundation move forward with this event promoter relationship where they hire an event manager promoter? I think you'll have a really pretty good idea of what they expect for certain acts, so that helps us do that. The other thing, to your point, that I think as our learning curve goes, as the amphitheater opens, it's in a new location, different than what we've had previous concerts, and we're going to have to learn about the sound disruption from those.
And traffic flows and all that.
Exactly, and there's going to be a certain learning on that. So you're absolutely right. I think there's a huge kind of a learning curve. And so we should consider that in our policy, that our policy doesn't, tie our hands too much in one direction, or not consider, future amendment to it in some way.
And I thought Sam really appreciated the dialogue. I think he appreciated knowing, kind of what we were thinking, and he seemed to be very, fair in what they were planning on doing and what they were planning on not doing. So it just keeps the conversation open.
And that's why I think it makes sense, to Rick's suggestion, and again, you guys can, decide this isn't right, but that line item about the revenue sharing, that it's actually in the policy, because that's an acknowledgement to the foundation that we have that agreement, that the revenue is going to go to the foundation, that we're not going to go out and seek events and promote events outside of the foundation. Not that I expect that we're going to do that, but what if a future board or staff decided to do that? So I think it's not a bad place to insert that language, so that there's a clear understanding that when it comes to big events that are in phase 1, which is the amphitheater, those are to be promoted with the revenue going to the foundation. So I think it's appropriate to have it in there.
Would we want to bring this back to a committee to planning with any edits by a certain date from board members? Or do we want to simply move ahead at an upcoming board meeting and amend the policy that we have?
That is a fair question, and I thought about that, and again, you guys, everybody else chime in here, but I kind of think that the board, we're all involved in this, and it's gonna be a board, you know, ultimately, we want the board involvement on it. So I would prefer to bring it back to the board after people have some thoughts on this. Again, we don't wanna have discussion outside of public, you know, public meeting process, but you have this document. Think about that, and we can, you know, if you wanna share some edits with me, I can kind of galvanize those edits and, you know, share those in a way either before or during the meeting that this is discussed. Because again, there's a lot of work in it, you can't know that today.
Park Foundation Board won't have a chance to see this until 14th of July.
That's fine.
Something like that. I won't be here at our next board meeting. I'll be somewhere in Ames or
Writing.
somewhere, yeah, right. So, you know, if we look towards August of, during that time period to get that back and forth, and, you know, Sam has, you know, as we all do, we've got committees and people are working on specific things, and so I wanna promote those discussions, so we make sure what we're talking about.
I don't think there's any.
And I'm a little disappointed, because I was really, when this started, I understood we were gonna get rid of all the trees and have 75,000 person concerts every week. And we've scaled that back a lot, so if there's even any discussion, I think
Mark,
this is
you
good.
might want to correct that.
That's, you know, it's,
We
it's,
know that's,
I
we know
think,
that's a joke.
and we'll get to this, you know, later, but, you know, at every step of the way, we've had people that were, you know, apprehensive about the worst possible scenario for them. And, I appreciate that everybody's come forward and been responsible. The Park Foundation has worked really hard, has exceeded expectations on fundraising and involvement, I think, and we'll talk a little bit more. Specific to the RFP, I think this board got a little excited about that somebody had responded to the RFP, and that somehow that should be seen as a responsibility of the Park Foundation, that they had, you know, solicited an RFP, and one of them suggested something that was outside of the parameters of what was asked for. And we talked about that at our last meeting, and that, you know, just because somebody says you should do something doesn't mean we're going to do that.
But
Or that we would even-
it brings it up, and you do your due diligence and you investigate it. And I don't think this board is anywhere off any further than the Park Foundation. I think we're all on the same page,
Mhm.
really.
So I think the August timing is fine. I mean, I don't think there's a great rush here. I think it's in the works. And I think if we could bring it back in August for the full board. I will, as I say, any edits or suggestions people have, I can make them. The one that I'll work on with Ted's help is some sort of language in there for those events that may have 1,000 participants but aren't hugely disruptive.
Walks.
That the staff, you know, the staff should be able, under the general manager, CEO and general manager's guidance, decide to approve those without.
And I think we need to be careful, you know, limiting a certain number of events over 1,000, because as Des Moines grows, you may have several thousand come down for the symphony or something, you know.
You might, right.
Things may evolve that we aren't expecting at all.
Right, and that's exactly right, Dave. That's why I was a little reticent to come up with some sort of fixed number. It's more about a process, and to me, it's more about the disruption that the event causes.
And if there's a problem, we have the veto.
You got it.
So,
I agree with you.
Would an acceptable date be, if you do have any changes, to get those back to Graham by August 1st?
Great.
And that would also give the foundation board 2 weeks after they meet, so that by August 1st, he could kind of work that through and see if we could then have a proposed change to the actual policy at the August meeting.
I think that seems like a good amount of time.
And what I'll do is I'll work on whatever you get to me. I'll get you, Mark and Dave, I'll get you copies of the draft, so you can take them to the foundation meeting and share them as you wish.
and we're lucky, we're dealing with a top-notch group. They're-
Meaning the foundation, not this
Yes.
one. Just kidding.
No, I wouldn't say that. The foundation, we're really lucky.
As a matter of nuts and bolts, it might be helpful if this was sent electronically.
I'll do it.
If you want to get it to Michelle, she can
Yeah.
send it. to the board, and Ted and I and perhaps some others would want to see it in electronic version also.
Perfect, done.
Thank you, Grant.
So, sorry to belabor that, but I thought that was important.
Customer Relations Committee.
Customer relations, we talked about the West Des Moines and Waukee study that they did, which I believe everybody's received a copy of, correct?
That's correct.
Which I think, and I'll let Sue and Bill chime in about, you know, the ongoing discussions and what's happening in the next few weeks, but my takeaway from one of my takeaways from our discussion at the Customer Relations Committee was that if ever there was a need for us to continue to look for alternatives when it comes to regionalization and the way we cooperate with our other partners and customers in this community, now is the time. And that the ongoing discussions are important and may provide some fruit as time goes on, but I encouraged Bill and Sue and really everyone involved in this process to continue to think about other discussions we should be having and coming up with other alternatives, because as the discussions, the ongoing regional discussions go on, you know, we continue to put decisions off, whether it's capital improvement or that sort of thing, and at some point we need to start getting to some resolution. And so I know, and I'm not asking Sue or Bill to comment on these at this meeting, but I know that some of those conversations have begun to happen, and I think those are all productive. And to be clear for people who are listening at home and elsewhere, that doesn't mean that anything about, you know, our walking away from the ongoing discussions, because we're not. What that means is we're being as proactive as possible, if that's such a term, when it comes to looking for other discussions, other agreements, other partnerships, other alternatives. Is that fair?
Due diligence.
Due diligence, that's a good word. So I'll say that, and then I don't know if Bill or Sue, you have anything to add on that or on what else is happening?
Sure, and I think a nice way to look at it is our Plan A and Plan B.
And Plan X and Plan Y.
D, G. But what I took away from our Customer Relations Committee is we are very interested in finding a solution on a regional utility, and that we are interested in, if that is looking at asset transfer, thoroughly looking at it, if that is another plan with not all of the players that are currently at the table being involved, that's an option as well. And I did have a conversation with Mayor Keir, and he encouraged us as a board to, if there are some concerns that we see as part of the West Des Moines Grimes Waukee study, to please voice those, to please make a list of those concerns, because they too want to make sure that they are flushing out any concerns or issues or things that are not being taken into consideration. And so I thought that was an interesting way for us to be part of this process, to help them maybe understand why some of the issues that Ted shared with us in the meeting, as far as kind of an executive summary of what the West Des Moines study, to formalize those and say, here are things that we see that may be a concern.
So we'll be doing that. I mean, I know there's lots of concerns about the fact they're gonna take effluent out of the water
Well,
upstream from us, and put it, are we gonna share those things with
Well,
them?
that's what I'm saying to this board. He is saying if there are concerns, he would welcome a list of those, so.
I'm
that-
somewhat
that
reluctant,
is-
realistically, I'm somewhat reluctant to do an analysis of their
Yeah, that's a
in-depth
good point.
engineering work. A lot of our concerns from a staff perspective are really ones that are at the technical level that we would expect that their expertise in choosing a professional engineering group would address. The long and short, and Diane as an example, I know didn't hear much of this discussion. Our concerns from a staff perspective really fall into three categories. Two of them are cost related. We see that their construction costs estimates are very different than how we would estimate now with some very recent data, incidentally. The second involves their operating costs for a RO facility. We obviously have that experience at our Saylorville treatment facility and disagree with what we are seeing in the report. And the third, and this is where we get into a more challenged technical discussion, competition within the alluvial aquifer, the same area, we believe, as our Maffett facility and our alluvial wells. And then, as you mentioned, Graham, taking their RO filtration concentrate and putting it in the river upstream from us is a significant concern, all of which ultimately, those two types of concerns are ones that'll have to be addressed in the licensing permitting process with the DNR, subject to our concerns and frankly our challenges. The other issues on costing, I don't think that we want to be in the position other than to raise in the abstract and let PFM or whomever the Des Moines or the West Des Moines Water Board wants to use to choose to review the financial data. We raise them in the abstract and not in the specific. So I'm a little reluctant to say, here's our multi-year engineering study, what do you think? Obviously, we think, first of all, that it undercuts the regional discussion, at least from a staff perspective. And second, that there are concerns that we have about our existing facilities in competition with the sites that are given here. And then our own experience on costs are far different than what we're seeing in the West Des Moines report. Absent your direction otherwise, I think staff has no interest in providing that in writing. I've had a discussion with Diana as an example about our concerns. They will have to, in their due diligence, decide which route they want to go, and frankly, there will be a reaction from us from a technical standpoint relative to our own concerns about the Maffett treatment facility, should they decide to cite it as recommended.
Is there and I'm just thinking out loud, Bill, is there a small step that we could take beyond providing them a full analysis of their plan? I mean, is there a way that we could send a communication to them that say, here are our broad concerns? We're concerned about the quality of our water, because this potentially could be dumping upstream. We're concerned about, the various.
And we certainly can do that. We've had that discussion. Again, at the technical level, if from a policymaker's standpoint you prefer that that's communicated differently, we could do that.
I defer to Sue. I don't want to ignore Mayor Gare's suggestion. I don't want him to say down the road, well, they've never responded, and I asked him to. I don't know if that's necessary or not, Sue. I agree with you.
In a very broad sense, the 4 areas that you mentioned, just in a memo saying we are following up, I think would be a very positive sign. Keep in mind, you may have had the discussion more at the technical side, but this is maybe more at the policy side with him and his city council as far as where they may come down on it. And when he made that statement, I thought it was a great opportunity for us to say, not to do a complete analysis and for Ted to take 2 days to say, here's why we think that your RO numbers, but at least to identify some broad areas so that when this other group does come in, they could at least say West Des Moines had concerns in these, or Des Moines has concern in these areas.
As a matter of course, what I would suggest then with your encouragement is that I'll be happy to send Jody Smith and to Diana Wilson as really our peers with a copy to Mayor Gear our concerns, but it'll be at the broadest possible level when we talk. It would not be Ted only, it would be about 5 of our engineering staff that would really have to wade into the details here. We have some very specific concerns at a high level. We have no interest in getting into a debate with Veenstra and Kim about their underlying analysis here. We'll raise the concerns, but ultimately this is a decision the Des Moines Water Board will make, and we'll provide feedback to them as our peer group, making sure that Mayor Gear is at least aware of the same high-level concerns that we're raising with the Water Board.
I agree with Bill, the gist of what Bill was saying. Our interests are different than a contract or a consultant that has future possibilities of building a plant. And I agree with the gist of what Bill is saying, I really do.
I agree, and I think that, you know, especially what I was trying to figure out the words for, when you talked about undercutting the regionalization efforts, I think that, you know, I saw, you know, as a professional counselor who deals with people in trouble situations, I like to read the advice columns in the newspaper. And last week, there was somebody who was talking about they had a perfect dating relationship with a young lady and had proposed, only to find out that she was already engaged with another person. And it came as such a surprise. And they wanted to know what the advice columnist had to say about that. And I thought it seemed obvious to me what I would do in that situation. But, and in this situation, it seems like when we're talking about regionalization and working together and what we're trying to do, and people are making efforts to try to build other plants and go in other ways, it does raise some questions, at least. So.
Sue, if I may, and Mark, I appreciate that analogy. I do want to underscore that Mayor Andewig and the Urbandale Water Utility, in contrast to what we're talking about, we're significantly into site selection, site purchase, design of a facility, and in these discussions stopped, and they've really done nothing for the last 18 months to move that forward. And I think that certainly signals that one isn't engaged anyone else in a way differently than what we're talking about at the table.
All right.
So I don't know that we have an agreement.
I think you've, from my vantage, if I can just synthesize it, I think you have directed staff to communicate with the West Des Moines Water Board and with operating staff our concerns at a high level about the Veenstra and Kim analysis. We'll be happy to do that, and certainly copy this board, obviously, as well as Mayor Gear as the de facto chair of the regionalization discussion.
Thank you.
But, I for one, I think I heard Dave say this too, I don't want you to do anything that you feel uncomfortable with.
Understand.
I want you to send a message that gives a broad picture of what our problems are. But we take your expert advice on this and aren't trying to make you do something that's.
We have our interests, and Easter and Kim have theirs, and
We will tailor it appropriately. Thank you.
Greater Des Moines Botanical Garden Board, we have a.
I have yet to anything to report. I haven't been to a meeting yet, so they, I don't think they've had many meetings yet at this point, and they just put me on. I'm supposed to go to some member thing, so I'll report next month.
Des Moines Waterworks Park Foundation Board, any additional updates, Mark or Dave?
You know, one, it was exciting. I think the biggest thing, one, we did talk about the RFP earlier, and we had a discussion of that, as David said, that people do their due diligence. We've got professionals in the Park Foundation who do this stuff every day for corporate and government, examining and taking care of problems. And when we had a RFP put out and somebody was kind of non-responsive, it was accepted as such. So that's not the direction the Park Foundation Board wanted to go. The biggest news, though, is we're kind of a quarter of the way through the secondary goal of raising an additional $4 million. There's some money from the city, $25,000. There's $250,000 from the county that we're looking at. There are other donors. We're looking at trying to figure out a way to get the pledge donations on a cycle so that we can make sure that we're meeting our bills over time. Not you, but that other bills we have to meet. The biggest thing, though, was the groundbreaking. It was great. All the staff and the folks that were there, people who've worked on this project over the years, that were able to come together on a very hot day out in the sun to similarly break the ground. It was nice to hold one of those giant checks and show that we're making some progress and get some media attention. The trees that are gone are kind of symbolic of you have to break with the past. and, you know, mazel tov. So we go forward, something having to change and moving forward. It's very exciting. In another year and a half, some of the things that people will be able to see in the park and do in the park, community's gonna benefit. It's gonna be a great part of this location in the city, and, you know, I think the employees here, staff will be able to benefit and enjoy that, and I'm looking forward to a lot of those things.
You know, Bill, the collection 20 years ago, do you have any idea of how many varieties we had? We have the same amount of varieties.
So you're talking about trees?
Yeah, the crabapple tree.
I don't.
Even though we cut down a few,
I don't, David.
we've not lost any of the collection, as far as I know.
Ted?
Well, there are 1,500 trees, about 300 varieties.
And we still have the same amount.
I would guess that we still have about
Give or
the
take
same.
one or two that
I would agree with that.
have, and
There's 1,400.
it's
1,300.
turning into a park, not an orchard. It just, it didn't have this number 20 years ago that we have today. It's really gotten a little bit overplanted for a real park with vistas and show and.
Well, and if I may, Dave, just run with that for a second. I won't get into the varieties and how many trees were removed and whether we extinguished a particular variety or not. I think the important thing to remember, really twofold. One, the foundation's working very hard, is gonna have a jury competition on some kind of honorable way to recognize the memorial tree process. And Ted and his staff have worked very hard for people who are individually aggrieved in providing them a replacement tree and the placards, but the foundation itself is looking at a greater memorial that I think will be very tasteful.
And it'll be permanent.
And second, and this is my 30 seconds of frustration and comment on trees. Whenever we build a capital improvement like this building, there is removal of trees involved. And in our business, we're in the water production and generation and distribution business. There will be trees that will be removed. Can we realign and can we be respectful? Yes, but to think that trees themselves are sacrosanct and can't be removed just does not work with capital infrastructure. We are often in the right-of-way management world in battles with the city about intentionally planting trees over facilities that whenever there's a problem have to be removed. We try to be cautious in how we manage an environmental part of our concerns, which are very real with our business, but no one can stand in a building and be terribly pontificating about removing of trees because the very facility that they're in, at least in this state, would have been treed in some way, shape, or form. So we try to be respectful. I know the designers, RDG, the construction contract tried to be respectful about how it was handled. We've had very little feedback, frankly, since the initial Register article now several months ago about memorial trees, but we're trying to do it respectfully, but also with the fundamental proposition that a great deal of our facilities are underground, and that means the trees have to be removed by necessity to be able to support our business model.
And I just want to add one personally, and for the waterworks. You know, I was on the Plan and Zone Commission, 10 years ago. I was sitting next to Tim Urban, and I said, Tim, it's amazing to watch the developers that come in here, and their plats have just been miraculously denuded of trees 2 weeks before they came forward here and asked us to approve what's going on. And we developed what we were trying to put forward, a tree ordinance. We've got an ordinance now that tries to deal with that and tries to mitigate the problems where people are just bulldozing over areas and having a clear space. Rick Tollickson during that time said he realized that actually green development, using less concrete and using other things, but also using the 150-year-old oak that's already in place, that you get more money and value, and it can be cheaper to develop in that way, that there are better ways to do that. And we tried to help get people to understand some of those things. So, my personal commitment on that is you have to, live on the earth, but you try to make the best choices you can, nothing's perfect. And during my time here and others here, the city wouldn't have been able to do the tree inventory if it hadn't been for the Des Moines Waterworks and funding and our commitment to looking at the trees in the waterworks, valuing the forested areas that we have in the city itself. So we're very committed to this, living in, one with the nature that we have around us, the water and the clean air. That's a big part of who we are, so we take that seriously.
Okay, moving along, we have our own Laura Sarcone doing our government outreach update. Laura?
Thank you, Sue. To reiterate what was provided in your memo, we have successfully gone through the primaries and convention process. So we have our candidates slated, and we have really narrowed down to two priorities for our off-season advocacy. We will be doing, one is inviting specific candidates onto our treatment plant and giving them a tour, a meeting, and just the open invitation to meet with us. And then also, we are hoping to plan an August event for all candidates, all sitting legislators in our service area, and the staff and board will be invited as well. And we are hoping that we can have that at a neutral off-site location like the Riverwalk Hub next to the river, so they can see the river while we're talking about river water quality and source water protection. So those are our two priorities for some off-season advocacy work. And then we are also working on looking at some best management practices from our neighboring states, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Nebraska, to see if we can align some of our priorities that mimic some of their really good work that they're doing in their states, and have something on the shelf ready to go if we have some good allies in the, after the election that can champion that in the next legislative session. And federally, we are monitoring the Farm Bill. Our friends at the National Office of Isaac Walton League reported back to us this week saying they were successful in getting cover crop and crop insurance provisions in the Senate version of the Farm Bill. We're hoping along with them that it makes it, that language makes it through conference committee after they have to flush out the differences between the House version. So we'll report back when we know more about the Farm Bill.
Thank you, Laura. Laura does such a great job. I love that it's not just legislative session, but she has things going all year long. So with that, Bill, CEO and General Manager comments.
Three quick categories. First of all, let me talk about our recent precipitation and flooding related issues. Our staff has done a terrific job. Kyle's staff and production and our distribution crews have worked really now for over a week, securing some areas of the park, closing down other areas. Carefully coordinated with the Corps of Engineers. We have seen the worst to date, meaning that we believe the projections that we've seen now on the Raccoon indicate that it's reached its crest and will begin to come down. Flight Parkway, as you know, is essentially closed to the west. Portions of the park from 31st or so to the west remain closed. Our largest concern in the kind of rains that we saw yesterday, as an example, is internal flooding at the plant, not damage or concerns about the river intruding through the levee or over the levee. When it rains as intensely as it did last night, our own storm sewer systems within the plant have a difficult time in moving the water out to the river. So we had a little internal flooding, I think a little bit of stores damage.
Just a little.
I'm sorry, just a little. Again, not something that greatly concerns us, but I thought you would find interesting that internal flooding is a greater issue, frankly, given the levee improvements we've seen over the last 20 years than external flooding, at least at this point. Moving on to another issue, you may remember that we, Des Moines Waterworks, you as trustees have been involved in litigation with BMG, Biosolids Management Group, who used to be our line residuals processor, who in a series of investigations involving Polk County Sheriff, DCI, Polk County County Attorney's Office, and ultimately criminal pleas have led to a situation where we have sued for money damages. BMG itself, as I understand, is essentially insolvent. However, there's a bonding company standing behind them, as is normally the case in projects that we're involved in, and sometimes other contracts. There'll be a mediation tomorrow involving that litigation. Whatever comes out of that, if anything comes out of that in terms of a staff recommendation, certainly I'll be meeting with you, recognizing that only you have the ability to approve essentially the dismissal of the suit and the acceptance of the settlement. But I want you to be aware of that. Rick's firm is providing assistance. Nick Critelli, I believe, will be our mediator tomorrow for that, so that should be an interesting time. I'll be personally involved in that, as will Peggy. There are some pretty complicated damages issues associated with the mediation itself. Lastly, and Sue, you were gracious enough to have noted it in your earlier remarks, this is the last meeting, board meeting for Danny Cloffer, who has just done an extraordinary job for us and on behalf of Des Moines Waterworks. All of you are invited to Danny's farewell party here in this room on Friday afternoon, opening at 2, is that right, Ms. Michelle?
Correct, presentation at 2:30.
2:30. So we certainly invite you to that. It's been, I would want to say, in front of this group, and certainly in front of any audience that we may have, Dan has been exceptional to work with and has served this board and this utility in an outstanding way. So while we're sorry to see him leave, we're happy for him to go into a well-deserved retirement. Michael McKernan will be filling his position in engineering, and Kyle, as you know, filling Michael's position, former position in production. Jennifer Puffer in distribution, freeing Ted up to do more of the chief operating officer's responsibilities. But all of that series of events and counter events could not have happened without Dan providing us great notice and a great process to work through all the interrelated items. So Dan, again, no difficult for you to sit there and listen to this, but I'm glad you can't say anything. Thank you for all your work. We look forward to you saying something to us on Friday afternoon. It's all Sue.